remember to unmute myself. It is episode 7 for the year. I've been a little bit lazy. I've skipped a few. But welcome everybody back to Get It. And Simone, Joe Moore, once again, it is good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So, just for the audience, this year we decided we're going to go from a year, it seems like, from an hour to a half an hour format, because people told me that they can't run on the treadmill that long, but they can listen to the podcast while they're doing a quick treadmill or a spinning bike or whatever. So, the conversation today is about how we change the way we work, and then specifically some of the practices that use today, and how that's made the work environment a better place. Simone, you call it humanizing the IT environment. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've always liked to kind of push the boundaries a little bit and ask some tough questions of organizations, of how they structure themselves, how they design and use their tech. And so one of the key aspects that I look at is how we interact with technology. And there's 3 core interactions I always look at. You know, there's people to technology, people to process, people to people. And of course, there's one common denominator there, and that's the people. Where is the humanity, in all of this? And a lot of the time, we've actually forgotten about where the humanity is. I mean, even Einstein, wrote that it's appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity, and that the concern that we have for ourselves and our fate should be our chief interest, regardless of what technical endeavors that we have. And yet we have a tendency to forget this in the middle of all the diagrams, the equations, the creation of the technology. And yet technology can provoke the same emotional reaction in humans, human to human relationships, because it plays such an important part of our lives. And we often have a love-hate relationship with it,
Yeah.
So that humanizing...
Sorry for that. I thought that the active speaker will become big, and then I made myself big.
You are.
Well, yeah. They say you can judge whether somebody is thinking too much of themselves by the size of their signature. Now, one of the problems that I've always got is I can do the signature in the block. I said, what? In that block?
In that tiny little spot that you're going to get, when you get your driver's license renewed or something, it's just...
Not possible. Yeah. And I enjoy my community, and my community is IT people. But you're quite right. I mean, it's not only about people to people, it's about those other things, and that tends to make things a little bit less human. When you start getting to be a number, and you have to follow the procedure, and don't what is say? Don't do as I told you to do, or something like that.
Yeah, that my father used to say that. Do as I say, not as I do. That was definitely you weren't allowed to break. That was why I talk about, I like to challenge boundaries, because you kind of taught me to always challenge what's there, because that doesn't mean it won't shift or change. And as we get older, I think we get a little bit braver sometimes to make those challenges happen. Or when we're younger, we just don't realize what the boundaries are, so we just go for it anyway. It's all
I was a little bit more brazen when I was younger with the way that I challenged this.
Oh dear. No, look, if we want to sustain ourselves, we're going to have to learn to adapt, don't we? I mean, that's who survives. Those who
Yeah,
adapt are the ones that survive.
yeah.
And not only,
I
but we don't want more than that. We actually want to thrive. I don't want to just sort of let things tick over. I want to enjoy whatever that evolution is.
yeah, I mean, create your own reality. Um, and within a very structured context, that's a little bit, I suppose, difficult to do, like an organization.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about the workplace. And if I think back about my earlier work life,
Mhm.
there were very little freedom in terms of how work was done. That's most probably why I didn't spend a lot of time in the corporate world.
Mm.
But it seems like today, successful organizations are actually those organizations that allow people um, to think, um,
Mm.
to be individuals, to challenge ideas, to even challenge authority for that matter.
Mm.
So how are many of these things that we're now starting to talk about, things like business agility and agile and DevOps and all of this stuff,
Mm.
is it helping us to make the workplace a more humane place to work?
I think it is to some degree, absolutely. There's definitely more human elements. This sounds really weird, a human as an element. There are more human, sorry, my mind went off into sci-fi for a second just there. But, it's the way we've structured, the way the business models are shifting and changing. And we know that the way an organization is structured tends to drive its culture, right? The way we
Yeah,
communicate and who we talk to, the way we maneuver, with what we need to do and how we behave. That makes a difference. So, if we want to see a more human organization, then we have to have that change within the culture. It needs to be reflected in the practices that are within the
yeah,
organization. If we want it more human, then the practices have to be more human focused. Hence why we've got such great work going on in humanizing IT, incorporating human-centered design and other things. But you were talking about one of the things that strikes me is our ability to be innovative and have new ways of working and bring in ideas. Um, a quick question for you. Do you think original ideas exist anymore, or do you think they're rare? I mean, there was a lot of originality in our ideas and what we wanted to put forward, but do you think they're fairly rare now? True original ideas.
yeah. I think that we've fallen into sort of this trap that we're sitting with base technology that helps us to innovate how we do things.
Mm.
And if you really think about it, what from a technology perspective is unique and new? Where's
Yeah.
the transistor? Where's the integrated circuit?
Mm.
Um, all of these things enabled us to do something that seems very original, but I think that
I think it's
it's
sometimes
very rare.
I think it's seeing something in something else and then being
That's
able to
also
create a
true.
new story from it.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's like art, isn't it?
yes, it's exactly like
You need
art.
to see the sculpture in the stone. Yeah.
Yeah, and you are influenced by what's around you, and that's another important aspect for leadership and organization structures and business models to understand in the practices that we use, because we are influenced and impacted by what's around us, and we can impact it, but that balancing act of how impactful we can be. So this is interesting. When we see something in something else, this is why I love things like biotech. This is where we're seeing some really fascinating, wonderful, human-focused uses of technology.
Mm.
And so when we see something in something else and we create this new story, and when it's really profound, we have a really intense and personal reaction to it. That's the human side of us. We have an intense personal reaction to it. When our senses and our intellect are captured by this idea, it really compels us to engage with it and get behind it and want to be a part of it and act on it, make it real. So, I mean, sometimes the ideas we come across, especially in emergent tech and everything, it can be a bit of a one-hit wonder. But sometimes we find minds that are out there, be they an individual that comes up with an idea, somebody else collaborates, and then it turns into something else. It's morphing all the time and evolving. I mean, when you find minds capable of creating ideas, not just once, but like over and over, that's really remarkable. And those stories are wild creatures too. And if we want a story that really humanizes IT, then we want those ferociously independent thinkers. We want evocative designers. We want that so we can be engaged with it and not just discard the ideas just because, as our friend Paul Wilkinson says, chasing after the shiny new thing and every new thing that comes along. We actually want something that's going to sustain us and help us thrive and give us that. So it's not just sort of being a bowerbird and say, oh, look, there's something shiny, or go squirrel. Oh, we want it's great to have the ideas like that too for brainstorming, but to really engage with the story of the idea, we need to have that personal and intense reaction with it. It needs to be something that, motivates us as the human. That's the human side of it that we want to.
Yeah. What I just find interesting about original ideas, truly original ideas, is that the evidence actually tells us that first mover advantage doesn't exist in that domain of innovation. It's normally somebody who's riding on top of somebody else's idea that makes it big. That's a little bit sad, actually, if you think about it.
I think the human side of it is always to acknowledge the shoulders that we've stood on. This is where our mental. This is where somebody can take something that is decades old and are actually able to help it adapt. That adaptation is so different to just being flexible. That's why I'm always looking for adaptability as opposed to just flexibility. I like to see both of those things. I think if we see it, we need to acknowledge it. And maybe that's when we need to call out, where are those experts that have been in that field? Where are the new, where are the new minds? I'm not going to just say new young minds, because there are so many people that, we've got those 5 generations in the workforce. There are a lot of them. Their ideas are flowing between young and old. I don't think it really matters. It's what strikes us in what we need. And I think that's the other thing. We only change because we feel the need to change. If we don't feel the need to change, we just get into that comfort zone,
So there's a rabbit hole. Let's go down that one. 5 generations in the workforce.
Yeah.
How are the expectations in terms of the humanity of the workplace different between those? And if you are a manager who's working with a generation that's expectations sometimes even clash, but certainly are different to yours, how do you deal with that?
I think a lot of it, going into it with a sense of curiosity, not just about about the person. One of the things that comes up quite often, and I discuss in the workshops with people, is when we ask that, okay, which company are you with, or where are you from, or, how many years generally experience have you got in IT? The next question is, what else have you done besides that? What are all the other industries you've been in? What are the other careers that you've had? And I've got a little exercise I do with them, which is to come up with 9 photographs that they might have on Facebook, or they might have wherever it is. They don't have to present them. It's just a little exercise they do. They must be in each of the photographs. This is about them. And then dissecting that photograph in the sense of, well, what competence do you see there? What skill sets are you seeing there that you don't even realize that you were using even in your current role, or you're adapting to looking at how you might use it in a future role? Something like, scuba diving. Well, there's a lot of governance and control and direction, and there are very specific technical skills you need to learn before even being able to take your first dive. You have to understand your equipment and, understand all the safety. You need to have your dive buddy, so you have to trust this relationship, and it goes on and on and on. But you could take that. You could take horse riding. You could take being a photographer. You could take having worked in a cafe, or any one of those things, and then dissecting that and having a look at just purely from a skills perspective, which is something technical. I know how to do it. I can do that well, versus the competency, the experience and the understanding and the application of how we think about things, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really important aspect of that. And really, for our people, for our teams, is helping them see themselves in those different ways. What is that mix that makes them who they are and who they want to be? And how does that then morph within the different situations and environments and the contexts that we find ourselves in? And this isn't just for the young people. This is for any age group. It doesn't matter what generation you find yourself in. You need to have that. And we bring things from our previous experiences that are really important, irrespective of the changes and the goals and things like that. We want to be able to ensure that we can connect our people, that our behaviors, our communications, yes, we're going to think differently, and we should think differently. You need cognitive diversity. You need to have conflict, to have discussions, to throw those ideas up into the air and be able to have the conversations. That's part of our lifeblood. That's the knowledge that develops from those conversations.
But for those things to be meaningful, we and this is what I'm sort of missing in today's workplace is didactic ability. As you said, we need conflict. We need to be able to argue about something without being argumentative. And that's a rare skill, I find.
I think it's the art of conversation. It's that ability to be able to sit down and look at someone in the eye and pause, think about what you think you heard, maybe even challenge what you heard, because the different perspectives are there. And that will help, I think, widen that view of what's going on. I mean, staying in tune to what's happening in our world in the now and adjusting our thinking where it needs to be is very important, because your leadership isn't about the title, with or without the title. Our ability to do that is what makes that difference, and really connecting humans with the purpose of why they're there, why we're there. Business results really are enhanced if we have that human-centric focus, where what we're looking for is we want people that are experience-minded. It doesn't necessarily mean they always have the experience, but they are willing to go through an experience. See, I think that's a big difference today, that we're willing to go through an experience and to build our concepts, to find out what's practical and what's not, and expand our minds and capability. Those are the businesses that are going to win. They're the ones that the ones that are able to expand their minds and their capability, and guide and support. They're the ones that are going to do that, because often being innovative just means interpreting some of the old things in new ways. Creating a culture, sometimes a counterculture, you know, to start shifting things. Um, yeah, there's a lot of things that are still emerging. So, mm,
But a lot of these behaviors then depends on the change in the leadership approach in the organization, I suppose.
yes,
Um, allowing people to be different, to think differently,
yeah,
to have a voice, to have an opinion,
hmm
um, to challenge the status quo. Um, and a lot of organizations find that, or managers or leaders within organizations find that very difficult.
I think when we can do it from a practical level, when we look at more of a competency transformation as opposed to just, you know, talking about digital transformation or technology transformation. We know that we need to upskill and reskill. We know that that's happening. And so this is where we've got other things like Sphere that I find extremely useful to help us understand what are those new ways of thinking, new ways of working, what are the different approaches to organizational change now, because you know the old ones they're gone. We have to shift in regards to some of those old approaches. It doesn't mean that a lot of some of the things in there doesn't have value anymore. It still does, but again, it's that adaptation that we're looking for in how we come to what we're doing. We still need the sense of humor, but we have to have the passion for the subject itself. We want the real world experience, not just the theory. Whether it's cross
Yeah,
industry, cross country, cross culture, we want that experience to be happening. Yeah, we want to connect all our humans with whatever that purpose happens to be in our organization and within themselves. I think
yeah.
that's the big grab. I think if you get that purpose engagement with them.
And I think from an individual's perspective, it's then the willingness to learn.
Yes.
And twice in this week now, I actually quoted something that's 23 years old. Alvin Toffler's um, Future Shift, I think was the book, Culture Shift, Future Shift, yeah,
Hmm.
where he said the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write, but it's those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn at a rapid
Mm,
pace.
yeah.
And I think it's that at a rapid pace that's the important thing. Um, because if you're not willing to learn without being precious about it, you
Mm.
can't unlearn. Because if you learn and you're precious about it, you don't want to unlearn.
Well, look, I mean, we do know that our certainly our cognitive skills can shift as we get older. I know definitely I'm not learning languages as fast as I used to, things like that. I think part of it is, you know, perfection is not really achieved when there's nothing more to add. So it's not like I keep trying to add more
Yeah,
languages to what I do or anything, but it's understanding when there's nothing left to take away. Like
yeah,
what's the simplicity of it? Where is that point where it's at its happiest, that it's at most balanced, that it's in that space that feels
mm,
yeah, I guess we find a new baseline for comfort, you know, that little extra magic 4% stretching, and it just puts you into that new baseline category, I think. We don't want to discard things as such, except for when they are no longer of use to us. Remember, we only value things that have something that it's important to us, it's useful to us.
yeah. I
And
think your statement there is important to us is less important. Useful to us is more important because quite often it's important to us emotionally, yeah,
mhm,
or from a status perspective, or
yeah.
so. Uh, um, and it's a difficult trick to actually find out what is really useful.
I
Um,
think if we're open to exploring the terrain around us, open to exploring the different ways people operate and work together, that just exploring itself doesn't give us the traction. It can be quite painful just to explore. But what we really want to understand is what's going to be our vector of where we're going. We need to figure out how we get that clarity around what it is that we want. And so those insights that we can gain from innovative activities, innovative approaches and things like that, that can really create a different dynamic, even on a, since we're talking about, humanizing IT, you're really looking at more the social engineering level of things. And understanding, is this technology influencing me to behave in a particular way, or is my behavior driving how I create the technology? See, there's a big difference between those two things. That dynamics behind that is, and looking at how do people just generally behave around it. And we need to blend approaches. This isn't about, one is better than the other. This is about finding your unique cocktail and the intersections of the context you find yourself in. But you do need to study them. You need to explore them. You need to practice different ways of doing things to find out what is not just the intellect, as I said, not just the intellect, but to the senses. It's marrying both the intellect and the senses together that gives us that decision about which way we want to head and how we want to be.
So there's two things that I was thinking of, and I can only remember one. And if I go on like this, I'm going to forget that also. You talked about purpose quite a few times. And as you know, I'm a big Simon Sinek fan. What do you think, how we're going to phrase this? What advice would you give to people about understanding their individual purpose and then the place that they choose to work in?
What we value versus what are our values and how we combine those things. There's a great framework I've and Kirsty McGowan, another one in our industry, she and I worked a lot on this, and it's called the Emotional Culture Deck, and it's kind of cool to work with here. And there's questions like, how do I want to feel at work? If there's a particular way you want to feel at work, and then and then we go into all the different ways you can describe those feelings. So I think really expanding your emotional vocabulary really helps you pinpoint here about, I want to feel good. Yeah, but what does that mean? How does that look? How do you feel in the conversations you have? Or how does it feel when the same thing when we're looking about employee engagement and their employee experience. Sometimes people get frustrated with the tool? Well, they're feeling frustrated. If you don't want to feel frustrated, then what needs to change? So, when you look at your purpose and you sort of think, well, how do you want others to feel when you're working with them? Or how do you want customers to feel when you're engaging with them? That engaging with the feeling is something that we've really lost. That's why the whole humanizing IT sort of comes into that. So it's important I feel this because. So it's not just what is the feeling, it's also gets a level deeper then, because it helps me do X or it helps me understand Y. So we bring in understanding and action based on what those things are. And if someone says, well, I want to be in IT or I want to be in service desk because I love helping people. Well, if that's our purpose, then how are we going to make that happen in the best way possible? What do you need in order to make that happen? If you find that your values, like sometimes when we ask people to pick out what their values are, what are the sort of words that describe their values? If they're saying things like trust, but there isn't trust, and the organization doesn't make them feel that they're trusted, or they don't feel they can trust the organization or their boss or their colleague, then, we have a big mismatch on what's happening. So it's looking for those things. It's helping people feel
Okay.
the combination between the intellect and the senses to then be able to make the decisions and find the gaps. And then what do we do about those gaps?
Last two questions.
Mm.
First of all, if it is incompatible, what then?
Oh, okay. So you have a choice. Now we know that some people don't have choices. They're there to, pay the bills and that sort of thing. They find themselves in that particular situation. And in that, then they want to look for all the techniques and approaches that will help them mitigate the negative feelings. And that's why we look at a lot at mental health and wellbeing programs. What do they have in terms of their personal life support as well as their organizational support, in order to make those things happen. There's nothing worse than, sort of you just feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall, or you find the work really boring, or it's just sapping your energy and then you've got nothing left when you get home. So we know that occurs, and so therefore we need to have those other things in play to at least support people through that. But they still have a choice. They have a choice as to what's going to work for them, how they want that to happen. And for those that can, leave. I broke no apologies for how there's organizations that sometimes I know I've been leaving, 6 months down the track, and I'm like, oh God, I just hang out for the next 6 months, if that's what I need to do. But again, that's where you have the support and you look for ways in which to manage that. And then there's other choices about, well, it's not right for you, then you need to look elsewhere. Find what we call a destination company. What is it that, where is it that company is going, and do you want to go in that same direction?
Okay, and then the last question, because we're already 3 minutes over. I told you it's going to go quick. What can somebody in a management position in an organization do to make their employees' work life more human? Think about 3 practical things that they can do tomorrow.
3 practical things they can do tomorrow. What's going to give them more energy? What's going to give them more energy? Is it environmental? Actually just have a look. What's physically going on in the environment that can be changed that will actually make their physical moving better? It can be as simple as something as the ergonomics of what they're doing, whether they're set up at home or in the work environment. It can be lighting, it can be temperature, it can be fresh air versus the air conditioning air. That can have an immediate impact. I mean, how do you feel when you walk out of a room that feels heavy and everything, and then you walk into a room that feels light? There's an instantaneous change in your mood and your energy levels.
So that's 1. 2 more.
2 more. You said what they can do tomorrow.
To make their employees' workplace more humane.
Ask them. Just ask them. Ask them questions.
Okay.
Be curious about what it is that makes them behave in the way that they behave. One of the first things I do is go in and say, okay, what are the top 3 things that are not working so well for you as an employee at the moment, and what are the top 3 things that are? Don't just focus on the bad, focus also on what are the things that we can strengthen even further that gives them the resilience to move through the things that cannot be fixed quickly.
Okay, so that's 2. Another one.
Just be human yourself. Be open, be transparent, be authentic, because they, just them knowing that you are there to support them That
Yeah.
first moment of when you're talking to them, that first moment in that day, the openness of your face, the openness of say, okay, don't ask a work question straight up necessarily. It's say, how's your mind today? You know, you don't necessarily have to ask them, how do you feel? Because all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm not sure. You know, it's like, how's your mind today? Not mindset. How's your mind?
Yeah.
You know,
Where you
and,
at? Yeah.
and then you can always, how's your heart? You know, actually think about mind and heart. Think about intellect and senses operating together.
Love it.
Just, yeah, be open, straight up. I think as
Awesome.
soon as they see that face, that's what they should be happy to be seeing your face.
Okay, everyone. So I'm going to go to the washout. Simone, just stay on, please. If you want to have a chat, first that I need to say is next up is David Barrow. I think he's on the 9th. And then after that, 2 weeks later, is Rob England. So if you're looking for an interesting conversation, I would recommend both of those. For those of you who want to contact Simone, here's a contact detail, and please do. So if you've got any questions or you need to ask her something or need some help or whatever, by all means reach out. I've never reached out to Simone without her responding. So would encourage and connect, have a chat, have a conversation. And then just lastly, a little bit of a commercial thing is you must probably know that we've just launched the Agile Adapt framework as a certification scheme. So please go to agile-adapt.com, go and check it out. Some interesting things. And if you're interested, well, contact me. And thank you for watching. See you in 2 weeks' time. Cheers.